So I thought I'd do something a little different today and go through my shelf of movies based on true events because they're definitely one of my favorite genres, I guess you could say. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. First one is Gunpowder. It's based on a plot to basically blow up King James's castle due to the discrimination and torture against Catholics back in medieval times. And the miniseries is very graphic. People are crushed, drawn and cornered. They are hanged, disemboweled, shot, stabbed. Very graphic stuff. And one of the lead actors, Kit Harington, is actually a relative of the man who conspired to kill King James. And there were also a handful of other people in the plot to kill King James, like Guy Fawkes. And the movie isn't 100% factual. It takes some liberties, but I thought it was pretty good. Good jumping off point if you like history. From Hell, starring Johnny Depp. I really like this movie. Of course, that's not factual either. It's based on the graphic novel called From Hell. Johnny Depp plays a detective named Aberline, trying to solve the murders of the prostitutes of Whitechapel. Again, it's based on a graphic novel of the same name, From Hell. It was supposed to be made like a limited series a couple of years ago, and nothing happened. I guess it's a lot different than the graphic novel. Uprising, about the Jewish Warsaw ghetto uprising. And of course, this was during the Holocaust and the various Jews who basically tried to fight back during that time. Judgment at Nuremberg. Basically, this is based on the Nuremberg trials. It has an all-star cast about the people, the Nazis and whatnot, who were put on trial for their war crimes. And it's directed by Stanley Kramer, I think. Oops. Yes, Stanley Kramer. Really good movie, all-star cast. Rosewood, about the Rosewood massacre. It's about a town that is wiped off the map due to racists in the town of Rosewood. In 1912, I think, in Florida, they lynched, raped, and killed the innocent black citizens. And there was a white citizen who tried to help the African Americans, and it's all true. It's not really as well known as some of the other racial riots and massacres back then. J. Edgar and The Aviator, both starring Leonardo DiCaprio. The Aviator is about Howard Hughes and his obsession with bettering airplanes and whatnot, and his career of filming movies. J. Edgar, of course, starring Leo again, is about J. Edgar Hoover, who started the FBI and whatnot, and his controversial methods. The Josephine Baker story. Josephine Baker was a famous African American dancer whose provocative dance performances were loved in France and other places, but they were basically reviled in America, and basically how she went from the hottest thing back then to basically like a recluse. So it's a real interesting story. It was an HBO movie. Miss Evers' Boys. Nurse Evers was an African American woman who was in charge of the Tuskegee Project, which basically injected African Americans with syphilis, and instead of giving them a cure, which was penicillin, the people in charge of it basically sat back and saw what happened. So, very sad. An American Crime is about Sylvia Likens. She was a teenager in the 1950s who was kept in a basement by a housewife. Her parents went on a carnival tour. They were carnival workers. And they left Sylvia, who was 15, and her younger disabled sister, Jenny, in the care of Gertrude Banikowski. And Gertrude and the neighborhood kids and her kids basically tortured her in the basement for their own amusement. It happened in Indiana in the 1950s. Another true crime, In Cold Blood, about the Clutters murders. In Kansas, two career criminals hook up and they decide to rob the Clutters, who were basically humble farmers in Kansas in the 50s. They are believed to be loaded with a lot of money in a safe. Of course, the home invasion doesn't go to plan. And it was the first true crime novel written by Truman Capote, who basically changed the whole literature and genre from back in that day. Capote, the next movie, it's basically a continuation of how he found out about the Clutters murders and became infatuated with one of the prisoners. And it's a good movie about ethics and whatnot. Bobby, about the death of Bobby Kennedy. I'm interested in JFK, so the movie JFK, The Women of Camelot, so movies like that. Hollywoodland, about the death of, George Reeves. He played Superman in the original black and white TV show. He was mysteriously murdered. It's about trying to find, out who murdered him. Before Night Falls, about poet Pablo Neruda. He was openly gay, living in Cuba under the communist regime. Citizen X, it was about... I haven't watched this one in a while. It was about a serial killer in Russia, I believe. Killed several people. It was a big deal back in the day because the powers that be didn't want to admit that there was a serial killer at the time. He murdered young people and adults and kids. It was really awful. Growing Up Brady, it's a made-for-TV movie about the actor who played Greg Brady and his memoirs. So, it's a cute little TV movie. It's not really controversial or anything, but I liked it. Kaylee Cuoco has a role in it. Pollock, about the artist named Pollock, and his illicit affair with a younger woman from back in the day. See No Evil, The Morse Murders, about a husband and wife who murdered children and one adult and buried them in the moors. It's a really well done, made-for-TV movie. There's only one scene that's really gruesome. The rest is off-screen. Longford, it's kind of a sequel to the Murders. It's a made-for-TV movie. It's about Longford, a man who basically tries to help incarcerated people, and he becomes like friends with the wife of one of the murders. So it's real interesting. Mommy Dearest, about Joan Crawford and her supposed daughter's memoirs of abuse. It was considered really campy back in the day, but I thought Faye Dunaway was really good in it. Frost versus Nixon, basically about the Frost and Nixon tapes. It was his first interview after he was out as president way back in the day. Really well done. My Friend Dahmer, about Jeffrey Dahmer as a teenager. Really well done movie, I thought. His friend basically wrote a graphic novel about his time in high school with Jeff before he became a serial killer. Zodiac and the Zodiac, about the Zodiac murders, obviously. Both very different movies. The film Zodiac is more about the investigation and the different people involved. The Zodiac is more about a police detective and how it affects his family. The Wunderland Murders, basically about Johnny Wad, the famous porno star who became involved in a massacre of various characters on Wonderland Avenue. Autofocus, it's about Ed Crane. He was a famous star on Hogan's Heroes, and he was brutally murdered. Monster, based on serial killer Eileen Wuornos. Dear Mr. Gacy, it was about his relationship with Jason Moss, who basically wrote a paper about communicating with Gacy in the guise of like the perfect victim. And he also wrote a book about it. Out of the Blue. David Gray, based on true story. He massacred people he'd known all his life, holding the whole town hostage, based on true story. Really sad movie, but it also showed like a lot of courage of people who were involved in the shooting massacre. Billionaires, Boys Club. Basically, it's about a young guy who runs a Ponzi scheme and his partner during the 80s and becomes involved in a murder. Now, this is like the 2016 movie version. There's a longer movie from the 80s starring Judd Hirsch, I think. He has a role in this movie as well. But I enjoyed this movie. Karla, it's a dark chapter in Canadian history. It's about her and her boyfriend. Her boyfriend is a rapist. And you find out through the film that she might not be as innocent as she appears. Sometimesin April, based on the Rwandan genocide of 1994. Really interesting movie from HBO. Very sad, but very interesting. Of course, the movie Selena, about the singer Selena, about her rise as a child singer and her rise as superstar. And basically her crossing over and singing in English. And of course, her tragic death in her early 20s from the murder by her fan club president. Blue Caprice is about the sniper killings from several years ago. And it's not as much about the sniper murders. It's more about how a young boy was cultivated to become a killer by his father figure. So, real interesting movie. And it doesn't really focus on the killing as much. The Anna Nicole Smith story, starring Willa Ford. It's kind of a corny rendition of it, but I still enjoyed it. Of course, Anna Nicole Smith became kind of like a sensation in the modeling world, and then her own TV show. Of course, she died, I think, in her late 30s. And her son Daniel died not too long before her accidental death. House of Saddam. Basically, it's a miniseries about Saddam Hussein and his final days. Tsunami, the aftermath, about the tsunami in, I think, Thailand, and how it affected different people who were on vacation and living there at the time. That's sprinkled with facts and fiction as well. That's a miniseries. And that's basically it for this little tour of my shelf of based on true story movies. I have another shelf. Maybe I'll do that another day. Depends on how well this video is received. So that's it for now. This was a longer video. I hope you enjoyed it.